opinion, it's impossible to learn about jazz blues without taking a close look at Charlie Christian. He's certainly one of my biggest influences, and he played a huge part in me learning to play jazz. Over the years, I've transcribed most of his solos, and every time I do that, I find something new to explore and a new sound I can get under my fingers and into my own vocabulary. As far as examples of Charlie Christian playing over a straight 12-bar blues, there aren't really many. This is a really good example. It's in the key of E flat, and it's a fairly straight swing 12-bar blues. This was recorded live when Charlie was playing as part of the Kansas City Six, which was kind of a supergroup of jazz legends at the time, including Lester Young and Freddie Green, amongst others. As always, we're going to need to learn the chords first. I'm going to show you a way of playing a 12-bar blues convincingly in that 1930s swing style. So we're going to start on the 1, we're going to play an E flat major 6th for 4 beats before going to our 4 chord, A flat major 6, for just 2 beats, and then we're going to make it 4 minor, A flat minor 6, back to the 1 again. Then we make this dominant, so it becomes the 5 of 4. So that's E flat 7, and it's leading us to the A flat 7 in the next bar. We're going to do 6 beats here, then 2 beats on an A diminished 7th, helping us get back to our 1. This time for the 1, we're playing an E flat major triad with the 5th in the bass. So you'd call this a second inversion. Now instead of just staying there, we're going to do some very typical 1930s swing movement. We're going to play this. So this is E flat for 2 beats, and then here we've got a 3-note voicing for a B flat 7. So this is 8 on the A string, skip the D string, 7 on the G, 9 on the B. Walk that same shape a semitone higher. Now you've got your 1 diminished, that's just an E flat diminished. And then keep the first finger where it is, move your other 2 notes a semitone further. And now you're on your E flat major triad again, only this time with a 3rd in the bass. Very common to hear that kind of thing. Then we're going to reverse back the way we came to that E flat diminished, back to the B flat 7, where we're going to spend a whole bar. We're on the 5 chord now, by the way, and this is the 5. That's your B flat 7. Try and visualize the root here. And then we're going to chuck in a couple of beats on the 2 chord, F minor 7, before going back to B flat 7, but instead of this voicing, we're going to go with our typical 3-note voicing off the low E string. And then we're going to play a turnaround. We'll do this one. So that was E flat major to E flat 7, to A flat 6, to A flat minor 6, back to the 1, and then the 5, B flat 7. So that would be like 1, 5 of 4, 4, 4 minor, 1, 5. Okay, now I'm going to play through that entire first pass through the 12 bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure to go back and check out one of the first lessons I uploaded to YouTube about triads and how to create jazz 3-note voicings out of them. I'll link it in the description. That goes into a lot of detail on these things. Now, of course, we could just leave that there and loop that same progression round and round, but I always like to do an alternate run of voicings, so these ones are a little more involved the second time through. We're going to start with that E flat major triad with the 5th in the bass, 2 beats there, and then an E flat 7, where I'm raising the bass note to the A string to put the actual root in the bass, and then returning back to the 5th in the bass. And then to A flat 6 and A flat minor 6, just like before. Now instead of resolving back to this E flat here, we're going to move down to the next inversion to create a smooth bass run from that A flat to the G. So that's the 3rd of the E flat in the bass of your E flat major triad now. 3rd, root, 5th. So that would be You can hear just how smooth that bass movement is there. It really refines the progression. Now in the next bar, this is where we had the E flat 7, so this was the 5 of 4. The theory is if we can introduce E flat 7, why not bring in B flat minor 7 to make a 2-5 of 4? So B flat minor 7 to E flat 7 to the A flat dominant 7. That's like doing a 2-5-1, where really we're thinking of the 4 as the 1 in that very brief moment. With that in mind, I'm going to throw in this cool little trick that I love to use. And again, I did go into a lot of detail on these kinds of voicings. If you go back and check out that Triads lesson, I've linked it in the description. So this is just a B flat minor triad. We're going to walk along that middle string, sharpening the 5th. Now this has become the E flat 7 with the 5th in the bass. Very neat way of doing a 2-5. Sounds really good for intros. For example, if we were playing I Can't Give You Anything But Love in the key of G, I might start with something like that. I might go... See how well that works there. Okay, so there's our nice little 2-5 trick, leading us to the 4, where again we're going to go A flat 7 for 6 beats before the A diminished 7th, and then E flat with the B flat in the bass again. Same walk as last time. This time I've opted for a different voicing. Instead of just coming back the way we came to this E flat diminished here, we're going to move that top note down an octave to the D string, and then we're also going to bar the first finger and bring in the B string so we get that octave here as well. And then when we move this down a semitone, it becomes even more apparent that this is just also a good voicing for a dominant chord. Imagine your B flat 7 bar chord, but you're not including the E strings. You'd end up with this little chunk in the middle. And that's a really good diminished voicing as well as a dominant 7th voicing. Again, these are really authentic voicings that you'll hear being used in this era a lot of the time. Okay, so that sounds like this. It's a great little run. And then again, we're going to do that F minor 7 to the B flat 7, and then the turnaround. This time we're going all the way down to that E flat with the 3rd in the bass again. And now the final little tweak. So anytime you're on a dominant 7th chord, like the B flat 7 here, if you go to your 3rd and construct an augmented chord off of that, that's a really nice sound. It's like a B flat 7 with a sharpened 5th. The augmented is kind of like the major version of diminished. You know, with the diminished, everything repeats in minor thirds. With the augmented, it repeats in major thirds. So the D augmented is the same thing as a G flat augmented and a B flat augmented. And that's kind of what we're thinking here. We're thinking B flat 7, we're making it B flat augmented, but we're grabbing a voicing that's close by and gives us this nice little climb in the bass. And then again, we're going to just finish here on the E flat with the B flat in the bass. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly breeze through that second pass on the 12-bar blues. 1, 2, 3, 4. Check out the links in the description if you want to get hold of the lesson materials for this. You can head over to my Patreon, where for just a small monthly cost you get access to all of the materials for all of my lessons. The materials include my backing tracks, as well as tab and notation in Guitar Pro and PDF formats. I also upload bonus material to the Patreon, so this would be other transcriptions and performances and Q&As and all that kind of stuff. If you don't fancy doing the Patreon, you can purchase lesson materials for just this one at the Gumroad link. Either way, I really do appreciate your support. It enables me to keep making these videos and to keep growing the channel. Right, now on to Charlie's fantastic solo over this. As always, just supremely melodic and tasteful. The first lick he plays, he's on that one chord, so he plays. Now Now if we think about that in terms of how it relates to the chord, you've got the third, the fifth, the 9 or the 2, and then the 1. So really you could just visualize this E flat major triad, which is a first inversion triad. You've got the third, the fifth, and the root, and just add this little scale degree above the root. And now the next bar we're thinking about playing over that 4 to the 4 minor to the 1. He outlines that completely. He plays. Now if we track what's happening on the D string there, there's your third of the 4 chord. That lands right on time for that A flat 6. So there's your major third of that chord. Minor third lands right on time for the next chord, resolving to the 5th of your E flat. Pretty great, right? You can really hear it spelling out those changes. And then he outlines that E flat 7 chord that we have in bar number 4 with one of his most common shapes. So here's my quick way of thinking about this. We're thinking E flat 7 3-note voicing, right? If you were to bar your third finger down across the top 3 strings, you've got an E flat dominant 9th. Now what Charlie often used to do was he would arpeggiate this chord shape. Instead of just playing an E flat 7 arpeggio, which would sound like this, he goes root, third, fifth, flat 7, 9, 5, 6 or 13. And quite often, like in this case, he skips that 5th on the top string. He also likes to start from the 3rd instead of the root. In fact, that little run at the start of the phrase, he's just running down from the 5th to the 3rd. So if you can plot out your target notes from an arpeggio and just connect them chromatically, it adds a lot of kind of bebop vocabulary to it. And now we're going to go straight into another one of his most used shapes. This is the equivalent of that same shape we just played, but on the next string set and played over the next chord, the A flat 7. So if we're thinking about starting on the 3rd of the chord, we're thinking A flat 7, here's your 3rd, at the 5th fret of the G string, that's your C note. We're going to go along to the 8th fret of the same string, and then outline this, what appears to be a minor triad, and then put the octave up above where you started. Get that shape under your fingers. That's a really useful shape. So I'd recommend, out of the context of these particular licks, just run up and down these shapes until you know them really well and you can use them in your own playing. And remember that you really have to know these to such a high level and so comfortably that they can come out of you like loose change when you're flying through changes at 230 BPM. You can't be waiting and thinking, because by then you're already 2 chords behind the band. Notice again how that's the same thing we had on the previous chord. If I moved our previous shape up to A flat and changed one little thing, finish on the 3rd, it's the same thing. These shapes are really important. Okay, so what does he actually play within that shape? He plays this. So he's adding a couple of neighbouring tones. Then he does this really great phrase where he hangs on to the chord, which sounds pretty tense over that E flat major. But it makes that resolution all the more satisfying. So this next phrase again just shows how much he's outlining the changes, because this is where we had our E flat diminished chord. He just runs down an E flat diminished arpeggio from the root backwards. Connects it chromatically to the root of the 5 chord, right on time for that change. So he's very clearly thinking about the changes. Beautiful phrase. So that phrase connected to the next B flat 7 phrase sounds like this. Again, a common trick that he would use there. B flat 7. Flat 9, resolving to the 5th of your chord that comes next, the E flat. And then he throws in one of his real typical kind of bluesy sign-off licks. So that's over the E flat major. You can just be visualizing a triad. Typical blues thing of sliding in from a semitone below, climbing up the triad, adding the sixth along the way, and then the minor third. And then he begins the second solo. So he starts on the note he's just played, and comes back the way he came. And then one of my favourite Charlie Christian licks. And again, it's all kind of surrounding this E flat major chord shape. If you can block it out into your triads, it really helps. He's playing the sixth, minor to major third. Those two elements added to your basic triad can give you all sorts of amazing blues and jazz and rockabilly licks. Just the addition of the sixth, and if you think about any time you're going to play the major third, go via the minor third, whether that's with a slide or a hammer or even a bend. Sounds pretty cool. The next phrase is kind of wild, but it sounds amazing on top of that 2-5 of 4, the B flat minor 7 to the E flat 7, resolving to the 4. Then on the 4 chord he plays another very typical shape of his. Connects it into that shape we used earlier. This first shape is basically just built around this central chunk of an A flat 7th chord. Now heading back to the 1 chord, he's going to play another very typical phrase. Now for locating and visualizing that, I'd recommend seeing it this way. Think about an E flat major arpeggio in this kind of C shape. Isolate the top 3 strings of that. Maybe add the 6th in on the G string as well. Now also add some chromaticism on that top line. Go one step further with the chromaticism. Minor to major third again, that bluesy thing. Now you've got one of those classic bebop rockabilly licks. And there's so many variations on that, I would just recommend really exploring it. Just really play around with it, shape it in your hands like putty. The next phrase is something that's so melodic and so simple that it blows my mind that it doesn't get used more often, this kind of thing. He's currently on the major third of the 1, right? Now we're heading to the B flat 7, the 5. All he's going to do is climb chromatically. It's that same line we just found down here, but we're just framing it differently. The way we're thinking about it is that we're aiming for the root of the 5th now, and he slides between each note. And then repeats the same kind of idea we just spoke about down here. And again, a little sign off, minor to major third. Add the 6th in along the way. Finish on the root. So there we go, that's a fantastic solo to learn. There's so many ideas that are easy to digest and remove from this and put into your own playing. And that's really how you've got to do this. You know, take one idea at a time and try and absorb it into your own playing. Move it to other keys as well, of course. You don't want to only do this in one key. Now I'm going to do many more Charlie Christian videos, one of which is going to be more about the shapes that he uses and looking at them in detail. And we'll use little examples from different solos. I think that will be a really fun one to put together. But for now, get this solo under your fingers, try and understand the thinking behind it. And of course, do learn the chord progression, because as you can see, if you can't map out those chord changes, you've got no hope of playing lead over that stuff. So don't neglect running through the changes. You really have to put a lot of time and effort into that, so you can see far ahead of you. You know, not just the chord you're on, not just the chord in the next bar, but the chord that comes up in 2 bars' time. So you can weave beautiful lines that land you there at the right moment. Now for this week's recommended listening, I'm just going to say listen to everything that Charlie Christian ever recorded if you can. There's some different box sets out there that I've got, but there's also some great compilations on streaming platforms like Apple Music. There's one called The Genius of Charlie Christian that's really good. That's got a ton of good takes on there. Standout tunes for me though to check out, especially for his solos in them, would be Swing to Bop, which is this really legendary recording of him playing live at Minton's Playhouse in New York. And he's playing with Dizzy Gillespie and Thelonious Monk, and he's just really cutting loose, and just going for it. Whereas when he was playing with Benny Goodman, his solos would be quite short and concise, and on this you're hearing him solo for minutes on end, and it's absolutely fascinating. So that's Swing to Bop. And then going back to the Benny Goodman takes, some of my favourites would be Rose Room. Some of these I've already done videos on, by the way, on this channel. Rose Room is one of my favourite solos of his. It's so melodic, it's just beautiful. Grand Slam, which is also a really good 12-bar blues. This time it would be in F, and it's at a much faster tempo. You can hear kind of the birth of rockabilly within that one. Solo Flight, which is a really good example of Charlie Christian getting an entire piece of music to himself. Brilliant interplay between him and the brass section. Stardust, just one of the greatest versions of one of the greatest songs, in my opinion. His solo on that is so creative and interesting. Some really kind of dissonant chords in there. Even a couple of power chords at one point. I Found a New Baby, another really good one, and again one I've done a video performance of in the past. Almost a gypsy jazz sounding kind of minor key piece, really good. And Honeysuckle Rose, again that's one I've done a video of. Just fascinating seeing how he ties all these shapes together so effortlessly. Even learning just a couple of those, you'll soon see just how much repetition he's using within his shapes. It makes you really become familiar with the material. Now let's just talk for a moment about tone. For this Charlie Christian tone, you want to use quite heavy strings. I use 12s on this guitar. These are tomastic flat wounds, but actually if I was going for that perfect Charlie Christian tone, to me, round wound sounds closer. I don't know what he used, but I prefer the bite and the mid-range honk of the round wound strings. These flat wounds are beautiful, but they're quite mellow. They're better for chord melody. My recommendation for round wound strings would be Pure Nickel Diodario EJ21s. They're 12 gauge as well, with a wound third. They sound awesome. This P90 pickup is the original one from 1953, and this guitar I just run it flat out for that lead tone, and I tend to run it through a small amp like a Princeton Reverb. Get the amp overdriving just very slightly, so that if you dig in you get a bit of compression. The other thing is to pick quite hard. These guys were using a lot of rest stroke picking, so don't be shy. You want to really flick the wrist at the string. I'm probably exaggerating a bit there, but yeah, definitely flick the wrist at the string. Try and incorporate rest strokes where you can, so that you hit the string hard enough that the pick rests on the one underneath it. That means that you'll be prioritizing downstrokes wherever possible. Pick-wise, I would just recommend anything thick, like 2mm and above. The one I'm using right now is a really nice one made by a company called Honeypicks. It's a 2.5mm thick plectrum, and it's a nice little triangular shape, so you've got 3 usable edges on it. Another pick that I rate very highly is the Dunlop Flow 3mm. I think it's a great pick, and these are really cheap and easy to find as well. Please do like and subscribe. Subscriptions make a huge difference on YouTube, and they're totally free. Just click one button and you've done it, and it helps me massively. Also, leave a comment down below. Let me know if you've enjoyed the lesson, or if you have any questions. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Right guys, so I'll see you next week for another lesson. Take care.